I'm Bernard Choi from the Public Health Agency of Canada in Ottawa. ICES has set a fine example, both nationally and internationally, in how to move things forward, how to provide added value in public health and health services research. I just want to see if it would be a good idea to produce a report, a historical report summarizing the past 20 years in terms of A, the historical milestones, how ICES went through that path, and secondly, what the lessons were learned from the collaborative joint effort. It could be in the form of a report or even as a scientific journal article, and I think that would benefit the researchers and the public health professionals nationally and internationally. Thanks.
Any comments from the panel?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Hi, my name is Arlene King, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Health for Ontario. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here at the brain spa. I'll use David's term. I work in the government. I work in the Ministry of Health. And I am particularly interested in the reflections related to David's comment about, and you started to elaborate on the absence of receptor capacity, and I'm assuming, but maybe I'm not correct in this, that you're reflecting on government. I'm thinking that this is really one of our important challenges, is that receptor capacity development, but also the ability to be able to do knowledge translation as well, and within government, and apply it to the policy development process. So I'd be interested in reflections from the panel about what's worked, what we can do better, and some ideas about how we can move this agenda forward. Thank you.
Perhaps Andres?
I mean, I don't think it's all a disaster. I think there's, at least in my tenure, I can think sort of individuals or groups within the ministry who had, I think, clear responsibility for certain programs or initiatives. And again, one's always reluctant to kind of pick out people because you're forgetting others. But I mean, three obvious ones that just come to my mind during my tenure would be Les Levine, who really ran the Medical Advisory Secretariat, had a HTA group with the ministry, and they had a kind of clear mandate to take evidence and use it within the ministry. And I found Les and his group a really fantastic receptor site. The Ontario Drug Benefit Program, I think, is the linkage between ICES researchers doing drug work and informing policy of the Ontario Drug Benefit Program is really quite remarkable, and almost real-time, actually, data sometimes. And then also, probably 6-7 years ago, the wait time strategy with Alan Hudson. But there again, there was a clear focus, a clear priority. So I do think that there's receptor capacities for certain discrete kinds of research that are done at ICES.
Sorry, Mike, I might have been the originator of the comment, so I think I'd like to qualify it. When I talked about lack of receptor capacity, I was talking specifically, or trying to talk specifically about for doing intervention studies. I don't think there's a lack of receptor capacity at all for the use of evidence that's generated in Ontario or generated elsewhere and is relevant to decisions in Ontario. Indeed, I think the receptor capacity is very good, and we have excellent relationships, better than anything I've experienced before in the other countries that I've worked. So I have no question about receptor capacity at all. I think it's great. But it's a big step to take a complex health system and for people to sublimate their natural tendencies and allow decisions about allocation of resources or techniques or interventions based on randomization. It's a huge issue, and it's quite clear when we talk not only within the areas of ministry, not just in the research and strategies area that we talk most to, but out into some of the programming areas, that the idea of randomizing LINs or some subunit is very, very hard, and it's hard for the LINs as well. They've already made up their minds whether they think the intervention works and whether they should get it. That's what I meant by receptor capacity, and I really would like to emphasize that it's for intervention studies of that type.
My colleagues are being very gentle with government. And as a zombie with 15 months to go in my term, perhaps I can be a little less gentle. It's not that there is any lack of people interested in evidence or lack of talent. There's more talent and remarkable energy in many of these ministries, not least the Ministry of Health, than one can really imagine. These are dedicated public servants who are smart as whips. The receptor capacity is a more complex issue. The system is not integrated. There's no alignment of incentives in many respects. And so when evidence arrives in the system, despite the ministry's best efforts, it's not clear how to deploy it except through voluntary collaboration across sectors. And frankly, until and unless we begin to integrate funding and align incentives, there will be a lack of receptor capacity. That's why the Accountable Care Networks model is important. That's why the most successful entities in terms of quality, accessibility, and efficiency are all integrated care delivery systems, whether you look at the VA system in the US or Kaiser Permanente. These are places that take evidence, that take the great work done by organizations like ICES and translate it most effectively. And so this is not anyone's fault. It's a systemic shortcoming. And I must tell you that although there's been progress in payment reform, and although some aspects of the system have evolved in the last 20 years, I stand by my view. It's Rip Van Winkle time. Most of the features are remarkably static. And so this is going to be, I hope, the reform that happens out of the latest cash crunch is actually get to grips with payment integration and more structural reform. I think at that point, all the smart people in the ministry who are meaning to be good receptors and all the fabulous outputs of this amazing organization can come together with many other research entities to create a transformation in the system. But to transform it from the top down by pulling big levers, dangerous.
20 years at ICES, writing the history of it would be interesting. But you'd have to have a parallel history of changes that have occurred in the Ministry of Health over those 20 years, going from 36 district health councils down to 16 to 14 LINs, having regional healthcare management or regional health planning committees, 5 that disappeared, the Health Services Restructuring Commission, which really made dramatic differences in terms of the organization of hospital services in particular. The move toward the health results team, the huge changes that went on in the management of health information around 2000, the Y2K problem. It's perhaps not hard to understand why there were so few crossing bridges between the Ministry of Health and ICES.
Thanks, Jack. So I want to get a couple more questions in here. So we're going to move to the short snapper section here, which means quick questions and especially importantly, quick answers, guys. And so,
Carol Herbert from Western. I'm a member of the ICES board, and I very much enjoyed presentations this morning. Two-line question. The credibility of ICES has been, certainly in the eyes of, I think, the medical establishment, has been its independence, the fact that we create evidence, we present evidence, and the evidence speaks for itself. There is a question, given the comments that have been made about the slowness of the pace of change and the Rip Van Winkle experience I think many of us have had looking at the video. There's a question now about whether we should be taking more of a policy stand, whether we should be making active recommendations as an organization, trying to push change. I'd like to hear your comments.
Who wants to start? David?
Looks like it's me, 'cause everybody else looking away. Carol, thanks, because I think these two questions, the one about interventions and the one about whether we are a purveyor of data and advice or actual policy recommendations, are the two key issues that face us. And I've got to be honest, I tend to sway. There are times when I feel we should really push, and then there are other times when I feel I'm really pleased that we didn't. And there may be some sort of compromise middle ground, which is to frame our results as policy options, as choices which are available, rather than pushing one model or another and laying out the pros and cons of each. And I suspect that middle ground might provide something.
A burning response, David? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, with policy and politics, as with clinical decision-making management practice, it's evidence, values, and circumstances. The evidence alone doesn't drive things.
Yeah.
So I think you're always looking at options, as David says, with the values and circumstances or context being the floating variables. We don't know what the political priorities, preferences, and values are, but we can try to anticipate the weights that would be given. We had many positive interchanges and major reinvestments made by the ministry as a result of the work in the early years. We debated, David, you'll be happy to know, this policy issue. And our general view, I think, was that policy recommendations would tend to come from individual scientists or faculty members, not from the organization as a corporate entity, which gave ICES corporate some plausible deniability from political wrath and stakeholder resentment, and enabled individual faculty to bear the brunt. And it may be still the way forward, in addition to delineating options.
I'll write that down, David. Thank you.
Therese Stuckel, ICES scientist. So I'm taking advantage of a unique opportunity that we have 5 CEOs of ICES in the room in front of mics. And I'd like to ask a question that you can't ask otherwise, but I've been here for 10 years now, and when I arrived, there were certain things people told me that ICES will never do these things. All of these things ICES is doing now. So I'd like to know in 20 years...
All of them legal, by the way.
They're all legal. Well, people told me they were not legal, but they were doing them in the States. So 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what will ICES be? Where do you see ICES going, and what will you be saying in 10 years that we have accomplished in the last 10 years?
Great question. Who wants to take a stab at that first?
Short, snappy answer.
Short and snappers, that's right.
I think ICES will be doing much the same as it's doing now, because the system doesn't change that much, as we found out. But we'll be doing so with much, much richer data, genomic data, results of diagnostic tests. That'd be my answer.
I'd like to add to Andrea. I agree completely with Andreas. I'd like to add that I do hope we're applying the same sort of analytical lens to social policies, economic policies, educational policies. I know we can't do all of that, but I think the intersection of these is critical for any society, and we shouldn't look only at health. So I think that's the next, but we've moved from health services research to health research and health system research, and I think we can move beyond that.
So we're going to take, this will be the second to last question, so.
Larry Chambers, I'm an adjunct scientist with ICES. I think it's this month the Ministry of Health Research Unit is going to report on our randomized trial of the Cardiovascular Health Awareness Program, picking up with what David just said, a focus on health. We spent about 5 years developing the program that focused on elderly people, bringing them to pharmacies, having their family doc send them to the pharmacy, and then having their blood pressure taken, and that, most importantly, the blood pressure being sent back to their family physician. We didn't have a lot of support at the highest levels of the ministry, but we did receive funding throughout the development of the program for the Ministry of Health Promotion when it existed, and we've had a lot of interest in the ministry. What we did as investigators was to take it upon ourselves to select the 39 communities in the province that were between 10 and 60,000 people, and we randomly allocated 20 of those communities to receive this program. And we were confident we could do that because we knew that there was high uptake of the program throughout the community. Well, we used ICES data to demonstrate that we could reduce hospitalizations for myocardial infarction, congestive heart failure, and stroke by 9%. And the paper was selected as one of the top 4 papers in the British Medical Journal in 2011. So this, I know when we started talking about this with many people within ICES, there was skepticism because they didn't think we could pull it off. But we're here today to say that we've worked with ICES to do a major internationally recognized study of the health, how to improve the health of a community, and using ICES data to demonstrate that.
Can I just add, I think that and Jack 2's EFFECT trial are really good examples of big intervention studies that have used ICES data, at least in part. And I would call Larry's, the trial that Larry's described as really a grassroots trial. It's how you change policy from below rather than trying to change the behavior of ministry or other health agencies.
Okay, thank you. So the last question, I'll take the moderator's prerogative and ask the last question. You didn't know this, but you actually had an option to write in a question, but we only received one write-in question. It was from, you may know him, Dr. Don Riddlemeyer. Don, are you here somewhere? No. Don, where are you? No. There he is. And so here's the question, and I do want a short answer, but I want an answer from each of you. Quote, in what way were you disappointed with your successor?
Mine's easy.
This one is really easy for me. David spoke for himself with his anecdote of the frozen toilet bowl.
I was such a constant disappointment to Jan. I know that. And it was a clash of cultures, really. What I learned, and not from Jan, but I learned communication, that yes means yes, no means no, that's fine. But what does silence mean? And silence in Australia means, yeah, it should be right, we'll go along with that. But in Canada, it probably means no. And I really, it was a major, and it was Jan that pointed this out to me. It wasn't that she was being silent, she never was. But she pointed out how I was misinterpreting silence as being, everybody agreed, and, oh, right, let's do it. No.
All right, well, let's go back to the start now. I'm not letting you guys off the hook. David, please, answer the question.
Wow. I was followed by perfection. Jack Williams. So I have no disappointments whatsoever. I'm just thrilled at how it's all worked out and delighted to be here.
Jack?
My hearing is terrible. So I'm going to speak a little bit extemporaneously because I'm not quite sure what my colleagues have said. But that's the way I spoke most of the time. I still have a picture from the Toronto Sun, and it shows this young 40-year-old man who is ready to leave ICES and go on to bigger and better things at the University of Toronto. And he's handing over the reins to a 60-year-old balding man. And I've wondered time and time again, why in the world would that make sense? And it was a bit of a challenge because I think this was the one time in change of leadership where we had a failed search. Can you imagine ICES having a failed search for president and CEO? Well, we did. But with the help of the successor and his willingness to participate and negotiate, and Don Riddlemeyer and all of the colleagues, what could have been a very big disappointment worked out. So I think I'm going to flip the question and say that's the part about my time at ICES that I enjoyed most.
All right, last word, Andres.
This isn't meant as a dig against you, David, but, you know, Jan, I thought, given the incredibly long history that she's had as ICES, actually, I think originally as a student, right? And faculty member, I think it would have been great had she thrown her hat into the ring to become the permanent CEO.
Maybe not last word. Okay, David.
I can only agree, and I would have hated to have gone head-to-head with Jan on that particular number.
Okay, not quite the last word. As I said.
No, but I haven't said anything about a successor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry.
Done.
David, please. David Naylor.
Do you want to say something about your successor? You don't
No,
have one.
absolutely not.
Are you trying to tell us something about the search committee here?
I wondered about your interest in the position.
Yeah, I just want to add a footnote here. Speaking of Jan Hux and serendipity, I want to come back to that theme. You know, it was about 28 years ago that I sat around a kitchen table in London, Ontario with a chemistry graduate student who was thinking of applying to medical school named Janet Hux, who worked in the same lab as my child bride. And you had told me then that this very impressive but somewhat uncertain young woman would be CEO of ICES and have had the run that she's had, I'd have been amazed. And it's just further proof of the great good fortune we all have had to be associated with each other in the organization. So thank you, Jan, and congratulations.